Civilizations rise and fall. Could it be that our own civilization is at such a precipice where we must transcend our limits, our conflicts and divisions, or fail like others have before us? Could it be that our barriers are less about science, technology, or war, and more about the very personal test of how we see ourselves and the world? Why would a simple garden inspire millions and also ignite fierce anger or even hate? Could it be a mirror, a symbol of the four thresholds we must all face on the path to a better future? And is there a new generation of visionaries arising to guide us through this crisis? Regeneration or collapse? Each of us must decide. Hi, I'm Michael Hogue. I've been a farmer and gardener my whole life and a permaculture designer for the last few decades. And through that time, something has been growing in my mind, this observation that I think is core to some of the central conflicts that we're all going through these days and that our society has to resolve in order for us to have a future. And recently, I did a video that really put this in perspective to me, and it was a breakthrough moment. You see, I did a video covering some of the science about these food forest gardens from Kerala, India, a place where people have grown their food in cooperation with nature in these forest gardens for millennia. And scientists are studying this and trying to promote it as a way to meet people's needs while also healing ecosystems and making the overall food system more sustainable. And see, these gardens meet human needs while also maintaining some of the highest levels of biodiversity on the planet, storing lots of carbon, maintaining fertility cycles and requiring very little in the ways of pesticides, chemicals, and poisons. So I did a video covering this, and two really surprising things happened. Well, they're no longer surprising to me because these things happen to me every time I have a video go viral. And that was the first thing. The video went very viral. It was seen by about 3 million people in just the first 2 days across social media, with tens of thousands of shares, tens of thousands of positive comments, and hundreds of thousands of likes. But something equally interesting happened, which was that there was a small number of comments that were, let's just say, extremely negative. In fact, there were no comments that were slightly critical. The comments were either positive and interested in this, because it appears that this is striking a chord with a lot of people who sense at their core that we need to find ways to cooperate with nature more and steward nature if we want to have a future. But there was a small number of comments that went immediately to being extremely vitriolic, immediate name-calling, harsh critiques, condemnation, expressions of contempt, people even using the word hate for how they would see people who would share information about gardening and living in this kind of way. And this isn't new for me. Whenever I have a video go viral about one of these topics, I always get the same thing. Really joyous expressions of gratitude for discovering these ideas and having their minds woken up to this idea that we can live in cooperation with nature. And also people who are expressing pure, vivid rage and hatred that I would share this kind of information. And it's not just me. Recently, I saw a creator do a series on natural swimming pools. Now, like food forests, natural swimming pools, like this one, are a way to meet human needs while cooperating with nature. These swimming pools use the functions of natural ecosystems and plants to clean the water instead of chemicals and machines. So it's using what we could call, and will call in this video, ecotechnology instead of machine technology. And her videos, just like mine, have a lot of people who are blown away by how much sense this makes. I mean, we evolve with naturally cleaned drinking water cleaned and maintained by ecosystems, which we know clean water very effectively. And yet, there was a small number of comments that were just extremely vitriolic. And the question is, why? And I think that I know the answer, but I'd love to hear your perspective on it too. What I have discovered from my interactions with people on social media and from my readings about this topic is that I truly believe that this is deeply related to why our politics are so divisive today as well. I think we're all aware that our politics have become a little bit hostile. And what's shocking to me is that a lot of times the people on the left who are just absolutely irate with the people on the right, who are absolutely irate with the people on the left, are often complaining about the same exact problem, but from a different perspective. What I see is that more important than our political divisions, there are four crises of identity that we all face today. Now, through my reading and studies, I've found four of these crises, these internal crises, that are barriers both to our society continuing on into the future. These are existential crises that will inevitably cause the collapse of our civilization. Now, all four of these thresholds are actually different ways of looking at a central conflict that exists within all of us, which we all must continually try to transcend. And this is a conflict. And when we talk about transcending and changing these things, we're talking about coming to terms with this central internal conflict and overcoming it. This is why it's a personal crisis for each of us. And the first of these is to transcend our mechanistic view of ourselves and nature and the universe and the world in order to adapt and adopt a systems-based thinking and a systems thinking approach. This means giving up the idea that we're all just machines and beginning to understand that we're part of complex systems around us. Now we can get an idea what I mean by this by looking at the scientist Danella Meadows' four leverage points for changing systems. Now, when we talk about systems, we're of course talking about anything that has complex moving parts that work together. It could be the economy, it could be our physical bodies, an ecosystem, and a society, a culture. All of these are systems. And Danella Meadows looked at systems and found these four leverage points, these four ways we can think about changing systems. These are what we could call brute force, which is usually just looking directly at the numbers and trying to change the outcomes of the numbers. For example, this is what you do when you want to lose weight. So you get on the scale, you see how much you weigh, and then you start measuring and counting your calories to eat fewer calories. One of the reasons why it's called brute force is because we're just trying to directly change the numbers in a very mechanistic way. The other thing with that is that brute force methods almost always entail a sort of violence or force because we're trying to just force those numbers into place. Now, if you're dieting, you've experienced that before when you're trying to lose weight, but you see that piece of cake over there and you really want that piece of cake. And you experience violence, this conflict between the cake and making those numbers go down on the scale. So we often see this, and we see this with a lot of things. We're talking about our gardens, then what we're talking about is maybe you see a pest problem, and you see too many of an insect pest on one of your crops, and you want to make that go down, so you use brute force, physical force, like hand picking or spraying pesticides in order to make those numbers go down directly. Again, if we take that approach in the garden, we also destroy our predator and beneficial insect populations, and so the pest populations go back up. And what we find is this is down at the bottom because it's really easy to figure out how to change it. You track your numbers and you try to directly change them. But this leverage point, when we try to pull on it, we don't really have much leverage, so we don't get much in the way of lasting change. Now, if you've ever tried to diet and just lose weight by lowering your calories, you probably haven't been too successful by it or through it, according to the research on it. It's not a very effective way to change the system. Uh, and same thing in the garden. When we use pesticides, we get stuck on the pesticide treadmill. It's also the basic idea of a mechanistic worldview, right? We see the numbers and we try to just use force to pull that lever to make them go down. Now, Donella Meadows pointed out that as we begin to understand and think about systems and how we're part of living systems and how we can affect those systems so they get a different outcome, that's when we become very effective in how we change things. To give another example that Donella Meadows often used, poverty. We have had a war on poverty for decades. Has poverty gone away? What we've done is use tax dollars to figure out how to track the numbers on poverty and then try to solve the problem by trying to directly interfere with poverty and maybe redistributing wealth from one group of people to another group of people. Well, that group of people experiences that redistribution of wealth as violence and they try to fight it, which is why a lot of our politics end up the way they are today, in conflict over how we deal with poverty, because we have the people who have the money and they don't want to give it up. So and in all this time, we've used tax dollars in very ineffective ways, try to make small changes to the outcome while leaving all of the big systems in place that reliably create the problem of poverty and wealth inequality, right? So according to Donella Meadows, if we really wanted to solve this problem, we would be thinking instead at how to change the whole system so that it doesn't create the problem of poverty in the first place. Then, if we do that, there won't be a need to take the money from one group of people and give it to the poor, because we won't have poor if we truly solve this problem by changing the system. And it's exactly the same thing with health or the garden. So to begin with, Donella Meadows says we can start to think about changing our behavior, changing the behaviors that create the problems of poverty, then changing the systems that produce it as well. This could be simple changes to things like education. It could be changes to how we deal with poverty, how we deal with incomes. There are a lot of things that we could do that would end up actually being experienced less as violence by people who are in power and who have money, and would eradicate the problem of poverty. And finally, we can move up to the area that has the most power, changing our paradigms and our mindsets, just as we're trying to do in this video, about ourselves and about the whole problem. For example, dealing with the societal paradigm that wealth and a good life requires concentrated, hoarded financial capital and money. Maybe we don't need money and to hoard money in order to truly live wealthy lives. And if enough of us can believe that, we'll reach a tipping point as a society where there's no longer a group of people who feels compelled to hoard financial wealth in order to feel happy. If we can do that, the problem of poverty may vanish altogether without us even having to try. And of course, we look at our ecosystems and the whole world the exact same way. When we talk about solving climate change or ecosystem destruction or soil loss, we're always focusing down here, this mechanistic worldview, in which we're just trying to look at the numbers and change them directly, instead of recognizing that we're all part of larger systems that are reliably creating these problems. If we change the systems, will change the problems altogether. And since we look at nature this way, we now inhabit a world in which our mental view, our mental paradigm for the world is one in which it is a machine, and that we can just fiddle with the machine to change to change the outcomes, put something different in and get something different. But that's usually not how things actually work. And because of this, we strip life out of the world and magic out of the world and out of ourselves too. So changing this whole thing and beginning to outgrow this brute force mechanistic paradigm and start to inhabit a world in which we see systems and understand that we're part of systems could be a profound change to how we deal with all of our problems on our personal level and on the societal level. Now, how do we change something like this? Systems thinking actually has ideas about this too. And what we find is that me seeing a problem and throwing information at you doesn't change the system. We know that it's really difficult to change minds, which are a complex system, by just giving them more information. That's brute force thinking. What we really have to do is change their paradigms, change what they want, and change the behaviors. Behavior is a good leverage point. So if I can change someone's behavior, I can change their mind. How do we do that? By giving them some ways they can begin to implement better systems thinking. For example, in the garden, and this is what permaculture does. Permaculture teaches people to overcome brute force thinking and to try more powerful leverage points right in their own garden where they can observe the outcome. And if they get it right and they see this powerful thing, we've started to shift their mindset and move them towards a more holistic, systemic way of thinking. So why would changing this paradigm, giving up our mechanistic worldview in favor of a systems thinking worldview, why would this be so difficult for so many of us? Well, think about it. For one, a lot of us define ourselves in a very mechanistic way, right? We may try to be good people and be valued and respected by society. How do we go about doing that? Maybe getting better grades in school, maybe making more money, having a larger friend group. We define ourselves, when we think about it that way, it's very silly to think that that number is me. But it's with this mechanistic worldview, we reduce ourselves in a lot of cases to a simple number and try to manipulate that number, thinking that it will change who we are. Now, beyond that, a lot of our politics, which is very intimate and personal to a lot of us. It's a lot of how we think of ourselves, and the political solutions and political ideologies that we become very passionate about are, in a lot of cases, old world mechanistic approaches, brute force methods, approaches to try to solve problems that we know are ineffective. People get very passionate about 18th century political ideologies that have long been outdated and have been around for hundreds of years. And yet we still have all these same problems. And those political ideologies have never solved them. And yet we define ourselves by these things, by those numbers, by those brute force methods to solving problems. And so if something starts to help us shake loose of that, a lot of times we can question it. And even a video about a gardening method, if it helps people shake loose of their mechanistic approach to solving the problem of gardening, it can be very threatening. There's also one more reason why people find this sort of thing so threatening. You may have already intuited this and it may already be in your mind. All of these four methods I'll be talking about are like four doors to the same room. And all of our prophets, all of our leaders of spiritual and moral life, all of our wisdom traditions have all tried to teach us an underlying truth to these four paradigm shifts. It's what's in that room that counts. And understanding what's in that room will help change all of these paradigms. I can't tell you what that is, but maybe you can guess. What is the truth in that room? What is the truth in that room? And that brings us to paradigm shift 2, abandoning a machine view of technology in favor of ecotechnology, an ecotechnic future and an ecotechnic view of the world. Now, it's very telling that I can make a video about a modern solution for agroforestry that can help solve real-world problems of agriculture. And very often one of the vitriolic comments I will get is people will say things like, well, they'll often use bad words because they're so angry. And they'll say, well, you know, we used to use the bathroom in a corner in the room, and now we invented toilets. So why should we use toilets? Why don't we just keep doing our business in the corner of the room if food forests are so great? Making the idea that our modern solutions of machines, tractors, and chemicals are real technology and represent technological progress, and anything that would abandon those is a retreat from technology and a move back towards being primitive. But this is what has us locked in this worldview of a machine that conflates machines and technology. Whereas we could be developing science and technology that is based in cooperation with nature and optimizing our relationship with nature. We could get lost thinking exclusively about corporate medical products, for one example, as the only way to improve human health. But we know, because there's good science, that ecosystems enhance our health. We can do things like forest bathing. We are literally going to third world countries that look like this and harvesting people's poop and then injecting it into Westerners' bodies. It's called a poop transplant. And we do it because it heals our degraded and destroyed gut flora that has been destroyed by our mechanistic technology. This is an ecotechnology that solves that problem. But we're using planes and medical equipment and all of this high-tech stuff that creates a lot of pollution and has a huge energy cost to solve the same problem, when we could just be making beautiful, diverse, healthy, natural ecosystems. Then we wouldn't need to fly around the world to collect poop from people who live in healthy ecosystems and then inject it into our bodies. Am I crazy, or does that seem like a better solution? Now, looked at from that way as a solution to the problem of gut problems, and the same thing is true of skin problems, by the way, these are both technologies that solve the problem. But one of them uses planes and machines and medical equipment, so we see it as technology. The other one is simply developing and returning to a healthy, optimized relationship with nature, which would solve the problem for us. And we have a lot of problems that this could solve. We know that this both reduces tick populations and mosquito populations, as well as making them less likely to carry malaria and Lyme disease. So living in a healthy ecosystem could solve those same problems, and instead we're paying a lot of money to try to develop medical technology that we can give somebody a shot to solve the problem that could be solved by an ecosystem. Again, there are a lot of people who feel very, very threatened by this. Part of their core identity is that we're gods. We have risen above nature. We're so much more profound and so much more complex and intelligent than people who would live in forests, is the worldview. And suggesting that people who live in forests in some ways may have a suite of technologies that is more advanced than ours, cuts that worldview to the core. But I know if you're watching this video, you've probably intuited the same thing, that we can develop sophisticated relationships with nature and ecosystems and turn the world into a tool that will enhance our liberty, enhance our health and our happiness, and in the same time, it will make the world itself a healthier and happier place. Oh, what again do you think was that secret wisdom that's been taught by all of our wisdom traditions? What's in that room? Is it related to this? The third threshold is the threshold of us. It's about recognizing that we are responsible beings in this world, that our actions have consequences, and that we have to lie in the beds that we make. It's as simple as that. Now, a lot of people have recognized this one. It's something that is dealt with in spiral dynamics from Claire Graves and people like Ken Wilber. It's a tipping point where enough people recognize that what we do in this world creates the world that then we have to live in. When enough people get to that point of responsibility and awareness that we make our beds, then that will be a major change for the world and for ourselves. Think about it. What kind of community would you rather live in? Would you rather live in a community where everyone's basic needs are met and everyone is taken care of and everyone can contribute then in their highest way? Or would you rather live in a society with dramatic wealth inequality where some people are poor and have to fight and steal just to have their basic needs met? Where people's health is left untreated such that disease can be widespread and rampant? Beyond that, would you rather live in a world with healthy, intact ecosystems and biodiversity, or one bereft of that, a desert? So again, how do we help people step out of this perspective of only focusing on their selfish needs and their families and their tribes to understand that if their tribe goes to war with another tribe, it's bad for both tribes? How do we help people understand that if they destroy their community to raise up their family, then their family has to live in a destitute community? We could call this, again, deep karma in a sense. We have to live with our responsibility for our actions. How do we help people see that and help people understand it better? Again, the permaculture perspective is the garden is a great laboratory for understanding this exact issue. Because right away we can see that if we use those brute force mechanistic methods and we destroy the ecosystem of the garden to meet our own needs, then we have to do a whole lot of extra work because we no longer have the ecosystem providing the ecosystem services that would have taken care of the garden. We can see this cause and effect very directly and easily and immediately in the garden, which makes it the laboratory and the classroom for learning this lesson. Which brings us to our final tipping point, the final threshold that we must all pass through if we want to save planet Earth and have a sustainable future. Well, perhaps not all of us, but as with tipping points, enough of us have to overcome this crisis in order for it to catch on and be the dominant mode in society. And when we do this, it will transform things. This final threshold is what Ken Wilber has called the pre-trans-rational fallacy. See, to Wilber, he pointed out that all of us as individuals and as society as a whole and cultures as a whole, when we first begin to understand the world, we look at things and, there's thunder in the sky, we don't understand it, we don't understand the river flooding, and we make up pre-rational, superstitious models for understanding them. It must be the gods. The gods were angry, so they flooded the river. As we continue to grow in our understanding of the world as individuals and cultures. We understand that we can begin to test things. We can understand cause and effect. We can understand why the river floods. We can understand why there's thunder, why there's lightning, why the earth is round. Hopefully all of you understand that. And so at that point, we can often have a crisis of faith, or a collective crisis of faith. The things that we used to believe, that there were gods in the sky, that there were gods looking out for us in our crops and the river and so on, fail to answer our question. Maybe we pray, maybe we do everything right, and the river still floods. The gods are still angry with us. We have this crisis of faith, and we can begin to understand why the river really floods. And then what happens is reason develops. The rational worldview develops. We develop science. We develop the ability to experiment and test and understand the world intellectually beyond superstition. But then, eventually, because we're inherently intuitive beings, and we have made paintings of spirit in caves for as long as our species has been around. In fact, predating our species, we had burials, we had all of these rituals. We know that we've had an intense spiritual life. Eventually, that rationalistic worldview, the purely rationalistic worldview, fails us because it fails to be able to give us meaning and cause. And it fails to understand or to explain why we feel what a lot of scientists and researchers and philosophers call an emergent property, the complex systems that we can experience. When I walk into a forest, I can have an experience that the forest is a whole beyond the individuals, and that the sum and that the whole has a value that is greater than the sum of the parts. And this causes us to have another crisis, a crisis of reason. And this is the place that many of us in society and in society as a whole are at today. And when this crisis hits, there are two ways we can go. We can, or three ways. There are three ways we can go. We can double down and retreat back to a pre-rational worldview. We can abandon reason altogether and claim that the scientists are all full of bunk, and that the only answers we need are in our religious texts. And then we can begin to feel threatened violently by anyone who doesn't believe that. We end up with a society with two very opposed views that are very threatening to each other. People who believe in religion who are very threatening to the people who are atheists, and they respond very poorly to each other. And each worldview is very threatening to the fundamental worldview and identity of the other group of people. And Wilbur points out there's actually a third option. And many of the people that I meet, many of the people who respond positively to my videos and who come and see me at conferences and who buy my books and who write me letters, they're all at the same point, which is to solve the problem this way. Use the tools of science and reason to solve problems of science and reason, and use the tools of intuition to give us meaning and creativity and solve those problems of identity and meaning. Both of these things can work together. We can fully embrace a spiritual life and spiritual path and ritual and ceremony and intuit it and use it for everything that it gives us. And we know, because we have good science showing that makes people happier, healthier, and more resilient. We have science proving a benefit to that worldview and to doing that. And at the same time, I don't have to believe those things. I don't have to force them on other people. They can simply be mysteries that I intuit. They can feed me and feed my intuition. And when it comes to answering how old the world is and how old the universe is, we don't believe something that was written in a book thousands of years ago on that. We use science and reason to solve those problems. So in this way, we can transcend the conflict between reason and pre-reason. And until we do that, there are people who are always going to be trying to use a mechanistic view of self-worth to fulfill themselves, trying to prove who they are and their value by making more money, by doing something like that. And they'll be willing to destroy their ecosystems and their communities to do it because they think and they've convinced themselves that that makes them a good person. So until we've reached this tipping point where enough of us have passed through these 4 thresholds, I don't believe that we'll be able to solve our problems. I believe what will solve our problems is this fundamental paradigm shift when we walk through those 4 doors and discover what's hidden in that room. And when we get that right, we won't need brute force, we won't need machines of war, we won't need to argue with each other on the internet to solve these fundamental human problems, because we'll change the paradigms that created the problems to begin with. Thanks for watching, and please let me know in the comments, what is in that room?